Pauline, thank you so much for agreeing to give us some of your time this, where are we, Wednesday afternoon in January. I know you're a very busy lady and you've got lots on your plate at the moment. We've been trying to get this podcast in for a while. I'm absolutely delighted to have snaffled you and got you on board for a show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Excellent stuff. Let's hope you're saying that after the next 45 minutes. Pauline, let's kick things off. We've got 20 minutes or so to give our listeners a real kind of insight into you and your background. Now, I know it's going to be tough to fit it all in 20 minutes, but start wherever you would like to. I mean, some of our guests literally do go back to like formative childhood experiences, but just give us a flavor as to kind of what's inspired you to ultimately do what you've done in your career so far and what you're aiming and your vision for the rest of your career is. And perhaps just in particular touching on the role that corporate ethics, responsibility and sustainability has played in you doing what you've done.
Yeah. It's really hard to sort of pinpoint an exact moment where I kind of realized that this was what I wanted to do, because my journey into this role had been a set of decisions that kind of, some of them happened a bit by accident. I kind of fell into the industry that I'm in. So I work, I should probably introduce myself actually. I am Pauline Robson. I am head of sustainability for EssenceMediacom in the UK, which is a media planning and buying agency, the largest in the UK. And I think, like many people in the industry, I think particularly on the media side, I kind of fell into the industry. Certainly when I was a student at university, I didn't even know what a media agency was or what they did, or even that it was an option as a career. And it's something that I kind of discovered. And
Pauline, sorry to interrupt you immediately, but what were you studying at university? What was the degree?
So I studied French and Latin.
Oh, very good.
Classics and modern languages. And languages had always been something that I was really interested in. So I'm half Macedonian. So I grew up in a sort of bilingual household, and always was fascinated by language as a way into culture, into kind of understanding people. And so, yeah, as soon as I could kind of specialize in languages, that's where it took me. And I think because originally my family on my mum's side, which is the Macedonian side of the family, is originally from northern Greece. I always had this kind of fascination with like the classics, the ancient Greeks and then the Romans. So I did classics and modern languages at school, and then did that at university. So actually when I got to the end of my degree, my first thought for a career was to become a teacher, because I really enjoyed what I was studying and wanted to carry on doing it. So I got myself onto a teacher training course, but had left it a little bit late. So I got onto the course for the year after I left my studies. And in the meantime, did a bit of temping in London, and ended up in a situation where one morning I woke up and realized that I didn't want to be a language teacher. That wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I didn't think I'd be particularly good at it either. So I ended up getting a role at what at the time was a home shopping company, and kind of had my first exposure to the world of media, I guess. And then through that, got to learn about media agencies and what they do. Thought it sounded really interesting. Applied for a few roles at different media agencies, and actually, one of the agencies that I applied to, the role that I went for was in what at the time was their direct response team, and the person who interviewed me said, "I don't think you'd be right for this team, but I think you'd be great working in our research and insight team." And
Pauline, let me ask you that. What was it, do you think, or did you get feedback as to why that suggestion was made? What was it about you and the makeup of you and your sort of your expertise, do you think, at the time that made that suggestion?
I think so. I'm quite analytical. in my approach to things. And I think I've thought about this before, actually. What was it that he saw in me that made me suited to that? And I think actually the sort of training from doing a degree in languages, a lot of what we did was literature. So it was analysing texts and looking for the stories and kind of understanding why things are the way they are. And I think that lends itself very well to working in a role in insight, which is all about, regardless of whether it's quantitative or qualitative, it's all about kind of piecing together data, looking for the narrative, looking for the story, and turning that into something. And ultimately, in that role, it's turning it into something actionable that kind of creates an impact. And so I think that training, that kind of, digging a bit deeper, is something that lends itself to that kind of role. So so I ended up working in the insight team, and I spent most of my career actually in working in media agencies on the research and insight side. So I did that for a long time. In 2000, I moved to what was at the time MediaCom, into the insight team there, and became the head of insight, did that for a number of years. And I mean, sustainability, responsibility was always something that was important to me. But it was never something that really featured that heavily in my role. It was, I don't know, it was something that I kind of was quite separate. So I engaged with it on a surface level. I knew about, climate change. I knew about the kind of issues, around the environment, social justice, but it was something that I sort of did at a surface level in my personal life, and, did my recycling, and I, joined Greenpeace and did all that kind of stuff, but I never connected it with what I was doing day to day in my role. And then I'm not even sure what changed, but in 2017, I set up the green team within MediaCom. So bringing together sort of a group of people from across the agency to try and kind of, I guess, promote sort of more sustainable behaviours within the agency. And it was very much at sort of behavioural, operational level. I wasn't really connecting it at that time to the work that we did as an agency. But it was something that I felt was something we ought to kind of be caring about as a business.
Well, that was literally going to be my next question, was it that kind of personal behavior, sort of the changes that you had seen in yourself and the things that you were doing, that you saw an opportunity within work to encourage other people to follow suit in many ways and to adopt this kind of broader awareness and to change behaviors whilst working within the company? That was what inspired you, your own personal experience?
I think so. And I think, it was becoming clear that the kind of, I guess, the challenges that we're facing as the human species in the world weren't getting any better. Me doing all the recycling at home wasn't really shifting anything massively, and it felt that there was a role for business in terms of getting on board with this. But so I wasn't necessarily connecting it so much at that point to the work that we were doing. And as I kind of got more involved through the green team and learnt more about this space, I started to make those connections. And I guess the real turning point for me was in 2018. So towards the end of 2018, I did a leadership program called Reclaiming Agency, which was run by what's now Purpose Disruptors. And I think the words life-changing kind of, I think, are sort of overused, but this, I think for anyone who's been through that program, it was genuinely a life-changing moment for me. And it felt like it had come at exactly the right time. I think the IPCC had just released their kind of special report on 1.5 degrees at the end of 2018, and it wasn't good news. And that was a program that really connected me to the urgency of the crisis, because up until that point I knew things weren't great, but I didn't realize quite how dire the situation was. So it really connected me to that in a very visceral way, actually. I remember the first session we had was about the kind of the reality of the climate crisis and where we were, and I came away from that feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. It was so raw. And throughout the program, it was all about, at its heart, it's about the kind of leadership that we need at this particular moment in time, and what that looks like, and what are the qualities of leaders who are facing into these types of challenges. And yeah, it completely changed the way that I felt about my work, about my life. I've changed so many behaviors as a result of it. It really made me understand the importance of community, actually, because the cohort that I was on was just a group of extraordinary people who I'm still friends with to this day, and who I've been connected to in various ways. And yeah, we went through this very, very kind of transformational experience together. And that's the point at which I realized that I wanted to kind of focus on this much more, and make it my career going forward.
And Pauline, I've got two questions relating to this. The first one's a bigger, broader kind of question. Did you, looking back to the classics, studying younger Pauline, did she always have the intention to be a leader? Did she always want to affect change from a leadership perspective, or was it something that grew and developed as you took on more responsibility in your roles and ultimately found yourself managing and running teams? And you just describe how the role of leadership in terms of your intention and ambition throughout your career.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'd never seen myself as a leader as such, because I think that the models of leadership that kind of held up on a pedestal, certainly at the time, but I didn't see myself in that at all. And so a lot of, I guess, part of my development in my career has been about working out what kind of leader I am. And, from a communications dynamics perspective, I'm very different from the kind of the norm of the agency, even certainly the norm of the industry, in terms of how I am and how I communicate. And so it's taken me a lot of work, actually, to suss out that I can be an effective leader and have impact in my own personal way. So I'm not going to be kind of, I'm not a jazz handsy kind of person, but there are other ways to have impact, and there are other ways to show strength and leadership outside of what might be seen as the norm. And I think we are starting to realize that a lot more as businesses. But I think for a long time that kind of, what makes a good leader has been a sort of certain archetype. And so, yeah.
And that brings me on to my second question for you. Thank you for segueing so beautifully back to this. But you mentioned that on the Reclaiming Agency course that you discovered, or a key focus was on what are the characteristics of the leaders that we need in order to facilitate the change that's required. 64, trying to say, you can say billion, but it's not enough, is it? $1 trillion question. Right. What are those characteristics?
So I think increasingly we are in a world which is uncertain, and having leaders who are able to be a bit vulnerable about their own kind of lack of answers to this. I've spent a lot of my career working in research and insight. It was my job to answer questions, or to ask people questions to get the answers, so that we could, show, what clients need to do. I think we're moving into a world where those answers are going to become harder to come by. And part of the role of a leader is kind of navigating through that, but also being really kind of comfortable with the uncomfortableness of not knowing. And that's not to say that we kind of go, we don't know, and we sort of move on to the next thing. We have to find the answers. But, I think being super clear on an answer when we don't actually think that's the right thing to do is not where we need to be going at all. So, yeah, So that's one thing I think.
Let me pick up on that, Pauline. I want to throw something at you. We had a comment made, and I know this is 2018, so time has shifted to a certain degree since you're on the course. But we've had a couple of shows recently where the use of the term clumsy has come up, and I personally love it in terms of the use of it when referring to kind of where we are at, and the acknowledge broadly that we are just in a stage where, as you've quite rightly alluded to, nobody knows all the answers. Nobody knows the exact direction that's required. And there are going to be instances, I think we were talking about this specifically relating to, I think in 2024, of the top of the FTSE 100 companies, I think there were 47 restatements relating to carbon emissions. And then they looked at the reasoning for those restatements. And I think it was something like 70% were down to recalculations based upon changes in methodology, but 30% were just down to pure error. And we debated and discussed this, and that whole notion, and it comes back to a point about vulnerability. It's that whole idea of we're just a bit clumsy at the moment. We're going to get things wrong. We're going to make mistakes. But if we don't create an environment in which we encourage, and again, I'm making sweeping generalizations here, where we encourage learning through doing, learning through attempting to come up with solutions that are supported by, the overarching kind of environment that we're in, that's got to be the way that we support sort of progress. Because otherwise, if we all just sit throwing, our position as being finite and being, the one that is in some way backed by some spurious data or some having true and sort of equivocal conviction in our position, then we're going to find ourselves in a really tricky situation. I don't know what your thoughts are on the use of that term clumsy, whether or not it fits.
Yeah, I think it's a really good word, because we're kind of learning this as we go along. And certainly within the agency world and the industry world, we're probably I don't think it's kind of remiss of me to say this. I think we're probably a little way behind some of the clients that we're working with in terms of facing up to our own impact and how we measure that. And our first kind of steps into that are going to be clumsy because we're sort of working it out between us. And so, yeah, I think being honest enough to say when we don't know the answer. And also, I think being open to inviting other people, other organizations in to help us find the answer. One of the things that I found really heartening about the kind of industry approach to this is the extent to which people have been working together. And I know we're going to sort of come onto it in the second part of this, but an example of that is through the IPA, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, where agencies who normally kind of compete are coming together to sort of find solutions to some of these challenges. So it's, I think opening up to different perspectives and to kind of working with competitors in a way that is pre-competitive, but kind of, helps us all to get to the solution quicker together is really important, because we're not going to solve these challenges by individual kind of organizations going off on their own and creating a thing. We need to take the whole industry with us, and kind of really drive it forward as quickly as possible. So that collaboration, and bringing people together is absolutely vital.
Here. We again, a common theme on the Responsible Edge, but the more we can talk about, collaboration and partnership, and let's all just grow up and realize the overarching threat here and work together. I think it's great to hear. And we will come on to the IPA piece in a moment. I've got one more or a couple more questions for you just on you. You haven't got away with it scot-free yet, Pauline. Talk me through what happens, after this sort of transformational moment, as you say, in 2018. Like, what happens from a professional perspective thereafter?
So that was really, I guess, the turning point for me, where I really wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about about sustainability, about how it relates to the industry that I'm working in. So then I guess the Reclaiming Agency program was all about the kind of, I guess, the sort of shift in mindset. And it was a real kind of emotional, the word journey is quite cheesy, I think, in this context, but it really was an emotional journey. I then went on to do as I think many people did and have done, the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership course, which gave me more of, I guess, the scientific foundations of sustainability and aligning that to the business world. And I just got much more involved in kind of working in sustainability within my own organization. And my role kind of changed a few times between then and now. So I had been heading up the insight team. I then took on a role sort of setting up our internal consultancy. So it was a marketing transformation consultancy. I found myself kind of working on quite a few projects that had a sustainability focus, I think, because that was my interest area. So a lot of the projects had a sustainability focus, and sort of became at one point the sort of unofficial co-lead for sustainability within the agency. And then as of, I'm trying to remember the exact date, 2023, my role has changed so that I'm now purely focused on sustainability within the agency. So that is kind of working with our agency teams and with our clients to really sort of drive sustainability through what we do. So that could be helping our clients to decarbonize their media campaigns, or helping them to come up with kind of common strategies around sustainability, and thinking about how the work that we do can drive sustainable behavior change. So there's a number of different elements that kind of fall under that remit.
I was just about to say, not a light remit. You've got a lot on your plate, Pauline. Let me ask you this final question before we move on to the article. Since this moment in 2018, this pivot, if you like, in terms of pivot, and probably not the right word, but this sort of transformational moment, and then what's happened in terms of your focus within your roles and the focus on sustainability since. How's that impacted you personally in terms of how you felt about your work? Has it helped you to feel like a real sense of kind of impact of what you're doing, and just touch upon, how it's affected you personally over the last sort of 8 years? 8 years. Is it 8 years? No, 7 years. 7.
Gosh, it still feels like...
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't believe it's that long ago. It feels like yesterday. I think COVID in between has had a real strange effect on
warped it.
The experience of the passing of time. But anyway, that's a really good question. I think there's, and I don't think I'm necessarily alone in this feeling, but on days where it's going well and I feel like I'm having a great impact, it's brilliant. But I think, and I always have to sort of stop myself and remind myself to look back at how far we've come, because there is so much that needs to be done, that the pace of change can feel really frustrating, because I feel that things aren't moving fast enough, because let's face it, they're not. At the same time, when I look back to where we were as an industry in 2020, the things that have changed and the things that have happened in that intervening time, there's actually been a lot of progress. Is it enough progress? No, but there's been a lot of progress. So there's this constant tension between, wanting to drive change and kind of those wins when they happen, feeling great, but also this realization that there's still so much to do, and how can we make it go further and faster?
And does that, and personal question here, but does that, how does that affect you in terms of taking work home? Do you find it really hard to switch off? Because ultimately there's almost, it's, again, comparing it to kind of other sort of metrics that one might work towards in terms of a role at work, in terms of realizing certain outcomes and goals. Like, this is this is such a big, such a multifaceted, such a complicated, multiple metric situation. Like, that, as you say, ultimately is frustrating because things aren't happening quickly enough. Like, what does that do to you personally in terms of taking work away from the office? Does it plague you in that sense?
I don't know that it plagues me. I've become very good at setting boundaries. Around kind of work and not work, because otherwise it does become, and it has in the past become all consuming to the point where it wasn't really doing my mental health any favors. And so I have become very good at self-care and learning when to switch off. So yeah, but that's taken a while to get to that point.
I was going to say, I'm going to ask you for some hints and tips when we finish recording today. And I should say that, we did have a nice chat about your 3 weeks in Indonesia that you took in December, which I have to admit, you certainly got me, looking at your approach to self-care and taking some tips. Pauline, that was brilliant. Thank you for being so open and sharing with us your experience and a bit more about your background. Can we now move on to the IPAs piece? And would you mind just providing our listeners with a bit of a summary of what the article kind of covers, and then just pick out, whatever the most interesting points are for you from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess alongside my role at EssenceMediacom, I wear another hat, which is that I am the chair of the IPA Media Climate Action Group. And just to give a bit of background and context to what that is. So the IPA is the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, and it brings together agencies from across the sort of advertising industry. So it's an industry body for agencies. And the Media Climate Action Group is a group of agencies that have come together to really drive forward the sustainability agenda within the media agency world. It's been going since, I think we officially launched in 2021, although we'd been sort of planning that for a bit longer. Originally with 6 founding media agencies, of which EssenceMediacom was one. We've now grown to, I think, just over 50 agencies on board. And really, when the group came together, we kind of came out of Ad Net Zero. So we were kind of aligned around Ad Net Zero's action point 3. So Ad Net Zero Advertising Association's kind of plan for the industry around sustainability. And they have 5 action points. I'm not going to go through all of them, but action 3 is about curbing emissions from media placement. So the group came together around that particular goal. I took over as chair, I think 2 years ago. Again, lost track of time. 2-ish years ago. So we'd been running for a couple of years when I took over. And when I took over as chair, I wanted to have a bit of a kind of review of where we'd come to as a group of people and to focus on what we wanted to do next. So we did a lot of really great sort of workshopping around what we wanted to achieve as a group. And a number of different sort of work streams came out of them, one of which was this piece of research, which is in the article that you've mentioned. And the reason that piece of research came about, so I'll talk a little bit about what the research is in a second, is that whenever we talk about sustainability within the industry, we don't have the data to kind of tell us what people in the industry really feel about sustainability and the climate crisis and how it relates to their day-to-day roles. There's a lot of kind of anecdotal evidence. There's a lot of, well, I've heard that people think this, but we never had the data to back it up. So what we really wanted to do was run a piece of research with talent working in the industry to really understand how people working in the industry feel about the climate crisis, how they feel about their roles within agencies, and how they feel about the industry in terms of what we're doing to sort of address it, to take action and have impact. So that's what we did. We commissioned a piece of research working with Ipsos, and there were a number of different strands to the research, but essentially we did a piece of quantitative research with IPA member agencies. So it was the first time that the IPA had kind of surveyed all of its member agencies in this way. we did some additional research alongside that because we wanted to understand how people within the industry kind of compare to the general population. And the other thing that we did is we spoke to an audience of 16 to 34-year-olds because we really wanted to understand from a talent perspective, how do people kind of who might want to come into the industry feel about the industry and its role? And so we looked at a number of different topic areas. So how people feel about the climate crisis. We wanted to look at, as I say, sort of future talent and how they view the industry. And we also wanted to understand how people feel about kind of mental health within the context of the industry, because we know that it's obviously a very important topic for the industry, but the relationship between mental health and climate anxiety is a really key one as well. So they were the kind of three areas that we looked at. And we also did some qualitative research as well. So we did expert interviews and we spoke to people within agencies as well. And it was really about giving a voice to people who work in the industry and kind of understanding how they feel about this particular topic. So that's the kind of context to the article. And then there were some really fascinating findings that came out. So the kind of the one that always sticks out for me is that when we asked people how they feel about the climate crisis, people working within the industry felt more anxious, more angry, and more demoralized than the general population around climate change. And they felt less confident and less empowered around it as well. So we can already see that there's a sort of a tension in the industry where people are feeling kind of, some really quite negative emotions around this. And, it's that kind of combination of feeling anxious about something, but and not feeling empowered. I think those two things kind of connect really well. And when we went on to ask people kind of which areas of their kind of, or which areas of the agency they felt they had, an ability to kind of create change, climate and positive impact on the environment was the lowest in that list. So people don't feel that they can have an impact in their roles, in terms of the environment. And I think this, it kind of highlights a challenge that we have within the agency world, that people don't feel they can have an impact in their day-to-day roles. And interestingly, when we asked people how they felt about the industry, people working in the industry generally feel much more negative about the kind of impact that we have on the environment through our jobs. I'll see if I can pull out some stats actually, because I can't remember them off the top of my head. It was a while ago that we did the research. But people were much more likely, people who work in the industry were much more likely to say that, we have a negative impact on the environment. 70% of people working in the industry don't believe that the industry is doing enough to tackle the climate crisis. And when we looked at kind of people's attitudes towards their own organisations, around 50% of people didn't think that their organisations were doing enough to address climate change as well. So there's this real, I think, potential issue coming down the track of people kind of not feeling that they have the kind of the ability to voice the concerns that they have and the ability to act on them within their organisations.
And you perfectly, Pauline, by the way, thank you so much for that overview. That was brilliant. And Paul, that's some really, for me, all the key points as well. That association or that sort of circular element between anxiety and lack of empowerment, if you like, and the impact of those two things on one another is, as you say, so can be seen as so linked and so one affecting the other to such a degree. I want to ask you in terms of the solution here, like in terms of some of the things that can be done in order to address these issues, like what can be done? I'm playing devil's advocate here, but is it too simplistic to say, well, look, we're talking about, the media and ad industry here. Like at the very core and heart of what the industry is aiming to do is to enable consumption, and ultimately consumption is the driver and enabler of climate destruction. So Like, is it just too simple to say that the people that are working within the industry are just aware of that quite uncomfortable truth? How do we go about addressing it?
Yeah, I don't think that's too simple at all. I think that's a really key part of it. I think we're at the kind of the sharp end of driving consumption, as you say, and I think people in the industry feel that quite keenly. And I think, that the skills that we use to drive consumption are also the skills that we need to, shift that into a more sustainable space. So, we, as an industry, we create desire for products. We create desires for particular kinds of lifestyles that people aspire to, to a certain extent, we drive aspiration. So we can shift the way that we do that through the talents and the skills of people working within the industry. So I think it's, your kind of question about action is a really key one. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing kind of for next steps for this project in a second. But for me, the antidote to this is absolutely is action. And I think that starts with, first and foremost, this is what this research was here to do, right? Giving people a voice, giving people a chance to sort of share how they feel and holding space for people to share some of these concerns. We can't always in that moment address them, but just letting people know that we're listening to them is really important. And then I think, education is a really important part of this as well. Making sure that people kind of understand, what they can do in their roles and how we can start going about addressing this. So, from a media industry perspective, we focus very heavily on media decarbonisation, but I still don't think we've cracked this as a challenge either. But how can people start to be more, aware of the impact of the work that they're doing for clients? How can we start to measure this in a more effective way? What are the decisions that they can be talking to their clients about on a day-to-day basis that's going to reduce the impact of the work that they do? So that's a very sort of simple thing that people can be doing. And so just making sure that we're signposting people towards the things that we can do currently. Obviously, there's a lot more that needs to be done and we're not quite there yet, but giving people the knowledge they need and equipping them to be able to have those conversations with their clients is really important.
And is there and I think this came up in the piece as well, is there a need for this, Pauline, to happen? Because you mentioned the sort of 16 to 30-year-old cohort that you engage with during this piece. Obviously, the Gen Zers are so much more. And I think 30-year-olds now fit into Gen Z. I don't know. I was quite mixed up. Let's say they are for whatever reason. Somebody might comment suggest otherwise, but Gen Zers are so concerned, aren't they, about only aligning themselves with organizations and industries that are ultimately, play out their own values and the way that they view the world. And obviously these issues are sort of front and center for them in terms of, organizations they want to align with. Is this something that the industry needs to get right from a talent acquisition perspective moving forward? Is that one of the key drivers to getting this in play now?
So, interestingly, to say that about Gen Z, so we asked the question about what people kind of really value from an organization when they're looking for an employer. Mm-hmm. And actually, the things that came up top, not surprisingly, are good salary, flexibility, opportunities, career advancement, things like that. Things like alignment to values and purpose actually came down really low on the list, which runs counter to the narrative that we hear quite a lot, because I think often the way that research studies are designed, it overplays the importance of alignment to values and purpose. And I think part of it is given the sort of economic circumstances we're in now. It's a really tough employment market out there. So people are probably less concerned about a company that aligns to their values and more concerned about, am I going to be able to pay my rent, and put food on the table? And am I going to have the flexibility that I want and the work-life balance and the ability to kind of, talking about self-care as we did earlier, the ability to kind of look after myself as part of this role. So they came up really high on the list, and kind of the purpose-led sort of responses came lower down. Interesting enough, for people already in the industry, that kind of values alignment and purpose question, that, you know, the number of people agreeing to that was higher than people outside of the industry. So I do think we have and this has been well documented, like the profile of people working within the industry is different from the general population in terms of our sort of values and kind of what we look for from a role potentially. So we did see that difference. So that's not to say that we shouldn't be thinking about this, because it's important. But it's also important from less from a talent acquisition perspective, I think, and more from a talent retention perspective, because it's people inside the industry who are feeling this, and it's people inside the industry who might be feeling that values alignment sort of moving out of kilter. So that's where the biggest challenge, I think, is we face a talent retention problem if we don't kind of get our houses in order and sort this out.
But again, coming back to your two, suggestions on things that need to be done in order to address this issue, let's listen to the people within the industry and listen to their concerns. Even if we aren't able to take action, let's listen to them and understand where they're going and ultimately support them. And then let's provide them with the education they need in order to be better informed to factor these issues into their own decision-making, working with their clients. So it all fits together, Pauline, and makes a lot of sense. What, out of interest, from an IPA perspective, like what's next? Like what are the next pieces of research? What are the next initiatives, etc., that you guys are looking at in order to further advance, these kind of circumstances, if you like?
Yeah. So actually, we're not done with this piece of research next, because you're again going back to your question about kind of actions. What we're working on now is taking this research and really building it out to some very kind of impactful actions that organizations can take. And this bit's really exciting because we've partnered up with AdNet Zero. AdNet Zero had just set up, so they have a number of different kind of groups working within AdNet Zero, but they've just set up a young leaders working group. So this is taking talent from across the industry, and not just within media and advertising agencies, but from across media owners, from across client organizations. And these are people who have, I think, under 10 years experience within the industry, but are promising leaders and kind of lent into the sort of sustainability climate space. And we brought this group together to look at this research and kind of go, well, what do we think as the sort of rising talent within the industry? If we were looking at this research and kind of going to our senior leaders and asking them for actions that they can take to really start to tackle some of these challenges, what do we want to see? So that's super exciting. We've had a couple of really, really sort of amazing sessions with this group of people who are so full of ideas and have so much kind of wisdom in this space already. So we're taking kind of some of the recommendations and thoughts and ideas that group's come up with, and the idea is that we'll then take it into kind of senior leadership within the industry and almost start a bit of a dialogue between the kind of the most senior leaders and the talent that's rising up through the industry to come to a solution. Or a set of recommended solutions anyway for how we can start to address this as an industry. So very excited to see what emerges from that process. And then the other thing that we're focusing on as a group this year is creating a sort of industry carbon calculator for media based on the new global media framework that AdNet Zero and the now disbanded GARM have come up with to kind of have an aligned methodology across different media channels for how we calculate emissions from media, because that's been a real sticking point around progress in this space. We've not up until this point had a kind of methodology that everyone has agreed on in terms of how we do that. So we're now starting to get to the point where that's happening. So we'll be taking that framework and building it out into the calculator for the industry, which is super exciting as well.
Super exciting. I mean, again, I will do a terrible job regurgitating, but essentially engaging with and listening to young, talented people on coming up with innovative ways of challenging some of these issues and coming up with a consistent, uniform methodology for analyzing the carbon footprint of media activities across the industry. Fantastic outcomes. I mean, I was going to ask you one final question, Pauline, before coming on to your magic one. How, and again, you made a comment earlier about like some days, you feel like things are really moving forward and progress is really happening, and others you don't. If you were to take like your overarching sense, like, are you hopeful that the industry can really turn itself around, or not turn itself around, but can really adopt and evolve into one that's sort of leading as opposed to being behind? Like, how do you feel about things in sort of totality?
I do feel hopeful, and the reason I feel hopeful is because we're making progress, right? So as I say, when we look back at where we've come from, it's, we have made a lot of progress in a relatively short space of time. I do also think one of the reasons that we're going to have to get there is because our clients are asking for it. And that is a massive driver for kind of what happens in the industry. And, certainly I'm lucky enough to work with some fantastic clients who are really leading in this space and expect to see us doing the same. So yeah, I am hopeful. There's, I do think, some of the focus around sustainability has maybe disappeared a little bit. It's not to say that work's not going on. It's just not front and center. And, I think as an industry, we tend to go after the sort of shiniest new thing. So it was sustainability for a while. And I worry that it might have been seen as a bit of a trend. But actually, I think that there's a core of work that's still happening that will keep progress going. So, everyone's now kind of focusing on AI as the next thing, which is obviously a very important thing that we need to get our heads around. But we can't lose sight of the sustainability conversation in all of this as well.
Let me ask you a question on that. You've just inspired me. I've had a conversation earlier today with somebody who's going to come on the show from the World Economic Forum, and she is doing a lot of work around procurement and sustainable procurement. And interestingly, she talked a lot about, what was the phrase she used? Oh, yeah, that was it. From signal to signature, which I had not come across before, but I love. And that whole notion of sustainability, like, are we doing it for that kind of reputational, driven reasoning, or is there some sort of operational requirement at the heart of it? And I wonder, she made the point, I wonder whether or not actually some of the kind of, I guess, the heat, if you like, coming off sustainability from a signaling and a reputational perspective, and actually for it to start being thought about purely from an operational efficiency driving perspective. And I'm making huge generalizations here. I appreciate it. But that actually could be one of the best things for the sustainability agenda, because it's shift the way that we frame it and the way that we talk about it. Just your take on that from a informed kind of media and advertising perspective. Do you concur with that?
I think so. I think there's something in that. And I think, when sustainability was the thing that people were getting behind, we saw a lot of greenwashing and a lot of empty sort of statements around. And we're now focusing back to sort of the core of actually, what does this mean for our business? And how can we start to kind of drive change? So, as I said, I think that means progress is still happening. It's maybe just not having a light shone on it as much as it could be. But then I think the worry then is that you sort of move into the space of green hushing, where people aren't talking about what they're doing so much. And I think that can be, as harmful, because then you end up in a situation where people don't think that anything is happening. And I think part of the reason why perhaps, people don't feel that the industry is doing enough, maybe, there's definitely more that we need to do, but some of it is definitely around the fact that these initiatives and this work isn't being surfaced in the way that it could be because the spotlight has moved somewhere else. So it's a fine balance between, getting it right is quite tricky. So
we're back to clumsy. We're back to being a little bit clumsy. Pauline, as you will see, absolutely obliterated our time he's on today, but I hope you've are happy that we've carried on a little bit longer. Let me conclude now with the magic wand question. Pauline, if I was to hand you a magic wand, you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant. What would that one thing be?
Yes. So, so many things, but I think actually
You can't use your magic wand to create unlimited magic wands. That's something.
No, it's wishing for more wishes. So I actually think it ties into this conversation we've been having about young talent. And actually, my magic wand, if I could wave it, would be to change the time frame that we operate in within the business world. So everything is so short term. Everything is all about how do we deliver the quickest return in the shortest possible time for our shareholders, and actually taking a broader view of time in our decision making. So, we hark back to the indigenous wisdom around the seventh generation. What would it look like if businesses made decisions in the interests of generations in people in 7 generations' time, rather than what the shareholders are demanding for the next quarter? That would fundamentally change the way that we think about, what we do, where we put our time, where we put our investment. And I think that would have a huge impact on what the world looks like.
I love it when somebody uses their magic wand to do something or suggest something that is both beautifully simple and also like wonderfully impactful should it ever come into play. I couldn't agree with more. I would go, as far as to say, I think not just from a commercial perspective, but I think if politically things shifted in that direction too, and we had longer term views on things, then the world would look very different. Well, Pauline, that's a great suggestion to end with. Thank you so much for joining us for a show today. It's been really, really interesting. There have been some key points that I think a lot of our listeners will take away and stew upon. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to my guest, Pauline Robson, Managing Partner and Head of Sustainability at EssenceMediacom UK, for joining me. Pauline's extensive experience in media decarbonisation, sustainability communications, and her leadership of the IPA Media Climate Action Group added real depth and nuance to our exploration of the IPA's recent findings on climate anxiety within the advertising industry. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.